Right. What is this? Items two? All right, everyone. Good afternoon. The meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, vice chair, and to my left is Supervisor Peskin. Today we are joined by Supervisor Norman Yee. I also want to recognize the clerk is Mr. Victor Young. Also want to give a shout out and a thank you to Leo D'Assis and Nona Melkonian at SFGov TV for broadcasting this meeting. Mr. Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the September 27, 2016 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Great, thank you. Could you call item 1?
Item number 1, ordinance amending the planning code by revising the zoning map to rezone certain assessors parcels in Midtown Terrace neighborhood from their currently designation as residential house, one family to residential house, one family detached dwellings, revising the zoning map to rezone assessors parcels number 2643B, lot number 8, from its current designation as public to RH1.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee's joined us. He's the sponsor of this item, and he will lead the discussion today. Welcome, Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and thank you for having this item before you today. The Midtown Terrace Homeowners Association came to me over a year ago to discuss the incorrect zoning in their neighborhood. Currently, Midtown Terrace was zoned as RH1 when the homes there are clearly detached and fit the characteristics of a RH1D, which is a D meaning detached neighborhood. We encourage the association to conduct comprehensive outreach to ensure that this zoning amendment was agreeable to the residents and property owners. After months-long outreach effort, the association was ready to move forward with their requests. The planning department and the commission unanimously support this decision to correct the zoning of this neighborhood. So today, I hope you will support the request to rectify the zoning code to reflect what is existing in Midtown Terrace residential single-family detached homes. Thank you very much. I think there might be some speakers.
Great. Yes, I do have a number of speaker cards. Is there a staff presentation, Supervisor Yee? Oh, welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. As Supervisor Yee said, the item would rezone the Midtown Terrace neighborhood from RH1 to RH1D. It would also fix a zoning map error, which has a lot that currently is occupied by a single-family home, but it's zoned P or public, so this ordinance would change that to RH1D like the rest of the properties. The primary difference between RH1 and RH1D is that the latter requires a side setback for lots that are 25 feet and wider. RH1 zoned lots also have a 1 unit to every 3,000 square feet of lot area with conditional use authorization. RH1D can only have 1 unit no matter how large the lot is. And while RH1D lots are excluded from the city's ADU program, RH1D properties are permitted to have ADUs per the state ADU program. The Planning Commission heard this item on August 16th of this year and voted to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance. The Commission found that the existing neighborhood character fits within the definition of RH1D districts because the neighborhood was developed as a single-family development with detached single-family homes. This character remains intact today. The Commission also found that the proposed rezoning would not significantly downzone the area, while rezoning to RH1D would eliminate the possibility of having 2 units per lot where there is more than 6,000 square feet of lot area. Only 28 properties, or about 3.5% of the total number of lots, could take advantage of this. And finally, the Commission found that there was significant public support for the ordinance. So that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for your remarks. Supervisor Yee, any other questions? Nope.
No, it's
Supervisor
pretty
Weiner.
straightforward.
Thank you very much. So regarding this legislation, we have received quite a bit of community feedback on it. To me, the only question that I have, in terms of whether homes are detached or not detached, and whether it's RH1, RH1D for detached, is not the main issue here. Because right now, whether it's RH1 or RH1D, it's a single-family home. I know for a very, very tiny number of the lots, there's the issue of the 3,000 square feet, but that impacts almost no lots. To me, the bigger issue is around our recently adopted accessory dwelling unit legislation that Supervisor Peskin had authored a version, then Supervisor Farrell and I authored a version, and we melded them all together and moved forward with harmony. In that legislation, RH1D is not covered, whereas RH1 is. So right now, as we sit here today, Midtown Terrace is included within the accessory dwelling unit legislation. If it is rezoned as RH1D, in addition to requiring the side setbacks, which I don't have an issue with, it would take Midtown Terrace out of the accessory dwelling unit legislation. That is it's a concern that I have. I understand that in the legislation we adopted, it references for RH1D the state accessory dwelling unit legislation, I believe, and says it applies, which of course it applies because state law trumps local law regardless of what we say. It's my understanding, and please, for the planning department, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe any accessory dwelling unit has ever been permitted under the state ADU law.
You're right. I'm not aware of any ADU that's been proposed under state law, and we're not entirely sure how we would actually permit those, but we are working on that now because of this new ordinance that went through.
So I believe the state ADU law has been in effect for 30 or 35 years. Is that right?
Yeah, some in the 80s.
Since the 1980s. And 0 ADUs have been permitted under that measure, and the planning department sitting here today isn't quite sure how that would work. Whereas we do have legislation that this board on, I believe, a 10-to-1 vote passed that does create a process building upon existing local legislation to allow for ADUs. So I would be interested in, and I do have, and I'll read this now, and what would be an oral amendment to address that issue and to basically provide that the rezoning from RH1 to RH1D will not impact the applicability of the local accessory dwelling unit legislation, but will provide this neighborhood with what it is seeking based on the emails I've received, which is to preserve the side setbacks. And for people who have not followed our ADU legislation, it's been a long, windy path, and it applies to the existing envelope of the building. It's not about expanding the envelope, it's about existing envelope. So I'll just read this amendment. For all lots proposed to be rezoned from RH1 to RH1D under today's ordinance, the prohibition of adding an accessory dwelling unit pursuing the Planning Code Section 207 does not apply. And what that would simply do is allow for the rezoning to RH1D, maintain the side setback requirements, but maintain fully intact the local allowance for accessory dwelling units that currently, as of today, applies in Midtown Terrace. So to maintain today's status quo for ADUs in Midtown Terrace. So that's an amendment that I wanted to sort of put out on the floor. We can listen to public comment and then discuss thereafter.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. To Supervisor Wiener, this may be 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, the state provisions notwithstanding. I guess, two things pop to mind. First of all, I do believe that you are one of the authors or co-authors of the legislation that was put on the ballot and ultimately that we worked out in these chambers that actually created the RH1D exception. So interestingly enough, as we had the two competing pieces of legislation here, there was one that actually would have covered RH1D with ADUs, and you were the author, I believe, or co-author of the piece of legislation that ended up when we merged them with the provision that says controls on construction, I just pulled this up, an accessory dwelling unit in RH1D zoning district shall be allowed only as modified by Section 658.2.2 of the California Government Code. So so if that was your policy rationale relative to ADUs, I'm not sure why all of a sudden, as something is being I don't even want to say rezoned. I actually see this more as the proper zoning nomenclature is being affixed to it. It really should have always been RH1D. But ultimately, and I don't really care, I was actually on the other side of that argument. I wanted ADUs uniformly citywide. But separate apart from that, I guess as a matter of political and community protocol, insofar as it is the Midtown Terrace Association that brought this to the district supervisor, I would ultimately defer to what the association that's been through this year-long process and gotten a unanimous vote out of the Planning Commission wants, and what the district supervisor who represents them wants, but it ain't the end of the world one way or the other.
And Madam Chair, if I may, through the chair, in response to Supervisor Peskin.
Yes.
Absolutely. I have always had a good working relationship with our RH1D neighborhoods, and I'm respectful of our RH1D neighborhoods, and I stand by that working relationship. However, this is different because this is expanding existing RH1D neighborhoods. I understand that there's an argument that it should have been rezoned this, or should have been zoned many decades ago this way, but it wasn't, and it's zoned RH1. And so I was willing, in terms of the existing RH1D neighborhoods, which are a very tiny percentage of the overall housing stock of San Francisco, to work with those neighborhoods. But I would have concerns about expanding the ADU local prohibition. So I understand your point on that, but I think I think my perspective, it's pretty clear. I think it's a reasonable one. So thank you.
Supervisor Yee?
Yes. What I'd like to do, Supervisor Wiener, is to give some time for me to look at your amendment in the language that you're proposing. I understand the concept, and my argument would be that, again, this is something that is a correction. It was always, the buildings there haven't changed. They're pretty much a RH1D. I'm going to be open to your amendment, but I need some time. I want to go back because when I worked with the Midtown Terrace Association, they did a real good job in reaching out to people to say, ask them basically, do you want your supervisor to move this forward? And pretty much everybody says yes. And I want to allow for them. I want to allow for them to make the decision. But it's really difficult to just make the amendment today and think that that we could reach out to the residents this quickly. And the only problem I have with this is one could make the argument in one of these neighborhood associations that are zoned, that would be zoned RH1D, to say, hey, let's change it. Let's start changing for us. And so that's opening up the door on the other direction where there's a possibility that we're going to start seeing that it's going to be inconsistent throughout the city in terms of what we're saying, and that depending on what pocket you're in, it might be different. So that's the danger of what you're presenting. And
if I may, through the chair, and I appreciate that, and I should have a continuing dialogue on this. I guess, in the end, this is about not downzoning in terms of the ADUs, existing neighborhoods where ADUs are allowed, right? Sitting here today, accessory dwelling units, new ones, are allowed in Midtown Terrace, and I just have a concern with taking that away. And I've received a number of emails from residents in Midtown Terrace, and the gist of those emails has been fairly consistent. It's about the side setbacks and the detachment, and about the concern that a good-sized single-family home is going to be turned into a bigger single-family home that goes property line to property line instead of having that setback. That's been the concern that I've read expressed in these emails, and the rezoning today with the clarification that this does not take away the existing ADU allowance, I think that accomplishes what I have seen in the numerous emails that I've received. But I do look forward to public comment on this item.
All right, with that said, let's go ahead and go to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. While you're speaking, you'll hear a soft chime. That soft chime is a reminder that you have 30 seconds remaining on your 2-minute allotment. I have a stack of cards. I'll call names. David McAdams, Rick Johnson, Joyce Mordenti, Norman Furuta, George Wooding, and Gordon Crespo. David, you can start.
My name is David McAdams. I'm a 9-year resident of Midtown Terrace and a former member of our Homeowners Association board. And I'm one of the primary proponents of this action. Our neighborhood is primarily interested in preserving the character of the neighborhood. And we've found in recent years that this is a real threat. We've seen a number of applications come through recently that have proposed development to the property line. And when we've gone to the Planning Commission and Planning Department and said, we oppose this, they've said, our hands are tied. These applications are meeting your zoning designation. So that was our impetus. It's still our primary impetus. And I would say that we really don't have an issue on the ADUs. It was never part of our plan to affect the ADUs in any way. So I guess the only thing is that I would say that if our neighborhood is RH1D, then I would say that we should first apply the appropriate zoning and then apply the other regulations as they apply to the appropriate zoning. However, it's much more important to me that we achieve the primary purpose of protecting the detached character of the neighborhood than it is for me to argue on whether we're under state or city regulations. I have had conversations with the planning department directly, with members of the planning department that I'm told are experts on this, and they have assured me that the state that applications will be approved under the state ADU regulations. They're just working on how that's going to happen and whether or not they have to notice for it. So personally, representing Midtown Terrace, if it's important for us to have an amendment.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rick Johnson. I'm president of the Midtown Terrace Homeowners Association. I won't go back into all of the arguments which have been given because they've been given very eloquently here. I just want to assure you that we have done an extensive outreach to all of the community. It was our primary position to preserve the character of our neighborhood, and one who goes every Sunday to all of the open houses to make sure that realtors know about our association and make sure that they do. I can tell you that I don't think I go to very many houses that don't already have ADU in the garage. That being said, again, as Mr. McAdams has said, we have no issue with the ADU. It is really about the setbacks and the character of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Joyce Mordenti. I've lived in Midtown Terrace since 1987. My parents lived there. They're in their 90s, and I raised my family there. I want to thank Supervisors Cohen, Weiner, and Peskin, and Supervisor Yee for supporting us on this. I want to thank Supervisor Weiner for thinking about this in terms of the new legislation. I think when we started this, we started it over 2 years ago, and in the last year worked with Supervisor Yee to bring the information together. That ADU difference for RH1 and RH1D didn't exist at the time that we were putting this together. And it was only through Supervisor Weiner actually responding to my email that I became aware personally that would make a change. Many of the homes in Midtown Terrace have in-law units. There's no intention to stop in-law units. The real intention is to stop the construction to lot lines and losing our green space. We want to retain our detached character. So I'm a personal resident. I'm very much in favor of the amendment. in that, again, when we started this, there was no discussion ever among our group of changing the freedoms of the homeowners with respect to ADUs. And I think that's new legislation that you've put before into zoning and caught us by surprise. And really, thank you for an ability to be flexible and think of a way to help us with our RH1D while still helping the owners and the city with ADUs. Thank you.
Thank you. I called up Norm Ferrutoda. Oh, there, Norm?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Followed by George Wooding, Gordon Crespo, Daniel Camp, Corey Smith, Terry Thompson, Sonia Traus, Laura Clark, and Vincent Wong. And if there's anyone else who I have not called, please get in line. Thank you.
Thank you, supervisors. My name is Norman Ferruta, and my husband and I have been over 25-year residents of Midtown Terrace, and we join with the previous speakers in their arguments and ask that you would approve the proposal to correct our zoning. I just wanted to mention one word on the discussion on the potential amendment to the legislation. I know Supervisor Yee probably has concerns that if an amendment is set forth at this time, that there be a similar outreach effort to our community to make sure that there is still community agreement with that type of change. And as one of the people who went door to door to many houses in our neighborhood, I'm a little reluctant to, I'm willing, but I'm anticipating the difficulty it might be to try to explain the nuances of that particular type of distinction between what we would be zoned just normally RH1D as opposed to allowing an exception for the city ADU program. Willing to do it, but I would suggest that you might take a look to see substantively what difference the type of ADU program under the state, how if it's more restrictive or less restrictive than the city's program, and if substantively there's not that much different, I guess I would urge you to see if the rezoning could occur without such an amendment. If it's determined that an amendment is necessary, I'm more than willing to do community outreach for that. But appreciate your time in looking into this, and I just wanted to express my appreciation to Supervisor Yee's efforts to get this to the point where we are today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I think that Midtown Terrace should be an RH1D. I also would like to mention that I don't see at this time a need for an amendment to accomplish this. You did a great job with Ordinance 16216 and state law, which I will read. An accessory dwelling unit in an RH1D zone district shall be allowed only as mandated by Section 65852.2 of the California Government Code. Basically, this imposes standards on second units that include but are not limited to parking, height, setback, lot coverage, architectural review, maximum size of unit, and standards that prevent adverse impacts on any real property that is listed in the California Register of Historic Places. So given that, I feel that there is no need for an amendment. The supervisors had a chance to put these two opposing pieces of legislation together and came up with one that kept RH1D separate. And that's fine. The city and the community should allow us to be in RH1D, but given the state law and the strictness of the state law, I don't see any reason for an amendment at this time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you for your work in getting this thing done. My name is Gordon Crespo. I've been a resident, I'm a native San Franciscan. I've been a resident of Midtown Terrace since 1987, and in 1984, thanks to the help of my parents, my husband and I were able to buy the home we live in 1994. So we've been there quite a long time. I just want to, I'm not going to repeat what everyone has already spoken about, because I think it's pretty clear that the neighborhood wants this zoning correction made. I don't want to see it delayed, whether or not there's an amendment tonight or today and it gets approved forthwith. The issue of the ADU is really secondary to the issue of maintaining the character of our neighborhood and nipping in the bud any applications that get thrown into this thing and having to fight people that aren't clever enough to figure out how to expand their homes without infringing on a 3-foot side yard. And I was an architect for 30 years. I retired, but it's certainly not necessary. And this thing, we need to be focused. This is about maintaining an RH1D character. The AD unit's certainly an issue, but not important enough to delay this at all. I've spoken briefly about this with my very good friend John Ram, and he's assured me that the state issues and this whole business of getting these AD units approved isn't going to be a problem. So I'm just speaking right now to say, let's not delay this thing. We need to get this zoning corrected, fixed, and avoid people being able to run to the building department and wasting the plan checkers' times trying to, I guess one group called it building McMansions on the relatively few lots that are available. So anyway, that's my 2 bits. And I want to thank the homeowners group, which I haven't been active enough in. I feel horrible about that. But we certainly are getting our $15.
Thank you. Next speaker, Daniel Camp, followed by Corey Smith, Terry Thompson.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a renter in the city, and I want to say that you should oppose this downzoning. The reason I want to say that is because I looked at their website, and the main reason that people seem to be proposing this is because they say the existing zoning, quote, has the potential to lower property values. In case you've been living under a rock, I want you to remember that the median home value in San Francisco right now is somewhere about $1 million, which is something that basically, 90% of the residents cannot afford. So what we'd be doing here by downzoning this is basically saying, let's waste more hyper-valuable urban space for the benefit of a few rich landowners at the expense of renters who are disproportionately young and less wealthy. I also have to say I'm a little disappointed to see that no one in this room, there's no affordable housing activists from low-income communities like the Mission or the Bayview, since they normally show up to oppose new market rate housing in their own neighborhoods because they keep saying, the rich people should live somewhere else. Well, here we have an example of a neighborhood that's very rich, has very high property values. We could be doing an upzoning to allow more duplexes or triplexes here to get more housing built there and absorb some of the rich people that are putting gentrification pressure on the Mission. But instead, this proposal we have is just downzoning and making it harder to add more housing to that neighborhood, which will increase gentrification pressures on low-income communities, and that is not right. So please oppose this downzoning. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Corey Smith on behalf of the 300 members of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. This became relevant to SFHAC purely in terms of the production of accessory dwelling units. It took the city a very long time to pass legislation to allow ADUs within city borders, and we would not want to do anything that would inhibit an individual's ability to build granny flats on their property. As a previous speaker stated, ADUs are currently in the neighborhood. None of them were built there legally. They will continue to be there going forward. I would seriously encourage a consideration in a conversation regarding the amendment introduced As the staff report earlier pointed out, 96% of the properties in the neighborhood would fall under the state ADU laws where it would be okay to build. So we're talking a very, very small percentage of the total amount of land there. Let's just try to make sure everything is done the right way. Let's wrap everything up and put forward good legislation. That's all I got. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Terry Thompson, Sonia Trausch, Laura Clark, Vincent Wog. Do we have to go in order? Oh, go ahead. Terry Thompson.
Hi, my wife and I have been residents of and homeowners in Midtown Terrace for about 8 years. And part of what drew us to the neighborhood were the trees and the detached nature. And we've seen at least 2 instances I know of where this zoning, miszoning, has allowed people to build to both sides, to the limit line on both sides, and it has created these enormous homes that are around $3 million, which is about 3 times what the homes cost currently. So in answer to this gentleman's argument, it's not a downzoning, it's a zoning correction. I would urge the supervisors to move forward with it. And again, I want to concur with all of the people that spoke prior from Midtown Terrace that are for this zoning correction. I would like you to view it as a zoning correction. I think that is what it is. And the sooner it's corrected, the faster we can stop people coming in and building enormous homes that run the risk of having no detached homes and just shoulder-to-shoulder row housing. That's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate all of your hard work.
Thank you.
Supervisor B.
Next speaker, please. Come on, Laura. Okay, Laura, Sonia.
I'm going to order, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm still learning every day, as you guys well know, because I failed so hard the other day. So I just want to say that if this was a correction that was sort of just reflecting what the neighborhood actually wants, then we wouldn't need to rush to do this. Clearly, there are people who want to build to the buildable envelope. There are people in the community who want to add more floor space to their homes. Currently, one of the main ways that millennials are living in housing is in multi-bedroom places. They are artificially splitting things that are zoned single-family home only, and they're packing as many people in as possible. So anything that reduces square footage is actually not good. Additionally, this would reduce the ability to split units. So lots would no longer be able to be split into 2 units, to 2 separate sellable items, which I'm sure is something that the homeowners really here don't want, but it is something that is needed. I also want to add that we need to recognize that our physical built environment is going to change. We are retrofitting our cities. We need to address the housing crisis straight on and recognize that we cannot spend so much time and energy maintaining neighborhood character above the needs of the characters we want to live in the neighborhood. We need to recognize that adding floor space, adding units, and we are going the wrong way with moving from RH1 to RH1D. We need to go the other direction, RH1 to RH2, RH2 to RH3. We need to be pushing in the opposite direction of where this is going. I think the symbolic value of this is pretty important. This is saying that this is going to push us further in the wrong direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sonia.
Hi, my name is Sonia Trausch from SF Bay Area Renters Federation and now the YIMBY Party. I argue this is not a correction because many of the lots are less than 4,000 square feet, and also, as people have testified here, many of the buildings already have ADUs. So if it was a correction, we've already seen that you would zone many buildings to become non-conforming, and that is not a good thing. In addition, so the ADU things might be resolved because of the state law, But there are several lots that are more than 4,500 square feet, and those, if they are RH1, can be split into smaller lots, but if they're RH1D, they can't. And we really can't afford right now to lose any opportunities for building units. I want to point out that the Victorians were McMansions when they were built, actually, and at the time a lot of people similarly thought that they were gaudy and awful. You can't turn a 3,000 square foot single family house into three 1,000 square foot units if you start out with a 1,200 square foot house. More square footage for living is more square footage for living. We should never turn it down. But the main thing is that the planning department erred when they classified this as not a project for CEQA purposes. CEQA specifically calls out downzonings as projects for CEQA purposes. There should have been an EIR here. It is appropriate to see what the environmental effects are of displacing possible future residences. If we don't build here, we're going to wind up building farther away from the core, increasing emissions and making commutes longer and not achieving our climate goals. So thank you very much. I'm opposed to this downzoning.
Hello, my name is Vincent. I'm a renter. How you doing? Hope you have a nice day. I have a philosophical point in opposition of this downzoning. I mean, I think fundamentally what's going on here is that we've created a climate where it's very difficult to build higher density housing, and then we've turned around and used our failure to build as justification that the zoning law was wrong from the start. So in this case, we've made it very difficult to build in Midtown Terrace. There's not a lot of high density in Midtown Terrace, even though it was legal to build this whole time. And now we're using this as evidence to say, hey, let's make it even harder in the future. Let's keep it at an even lower density. And I would say, I agree with Laura that this is a symbolic movement in some way. Like whether this downzoning succeeds will signal to other neighborhoods whether this is a good strategy or not, whether we can use general opposition of building housing to justify at a later date the idea that we can downzone our neighborhood to what we really wanted to be all along in terms of preserving property value or open space or however we want to justify not building additional square footage for people to live. And I think that's just a very dangerous idea. And it might seem innocuous now at this meeting, and we can argue about ADUs or whatever, but I think the whole thrust of it is scary. Like, we should be scared. I don't like it. Anyway, that's it. My name is Vincent. See you around.
Thank you. Are there any other members? Please come speak. If there's anyone else that'd like to speak on item 1, please come up to the podium.
Hi, my name is Bridget Chernin from Balboa Terrace. I'm a native, and I'm here actually for another topic, but in hearing this, I'm dealing with the planning department, and I believe that having RH1D for Midtown Terrace would be in their benefit. Everyone's talking about increasing of enlarging property and creating more housing, but no one has talked about the section planning code 136 requires the projection into the side yards of 3 feet or 1/6, whatever is less. And this is for public safety. It's a fire code. The reason why we have side ordinance is for fire code and safety. Midtown Terrace is probably the same type of subdivision as Balboa Terrace, St. Francis Wood, Ingleside Terrace. These were created for safety, for having people ingress and egress, and I hope that you really consider this. We can all agree that there's housings throughout San Francisco that is being built, so I believe our suburban area, which is District 7, should be kept preserved, and there are other areas that you can live at. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to speak on item 1? Okay, we're going to close public comment. Public comment is closed. Thank you very much. So let's see. I don't know, Supervisor Yee, is there anything that you'd like to say? Any last-minute words? If not, we're going to take the matter in the committee's hands.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the public for coming out, whether you support it or don't support it. But I in particularly want to thank the residents of Midtown Terrace for coming down here today. I've been working with the association for nearly a year, if not over a year, to get this done. And it's real important for me to support this as it is. When we talk about neighborhood characteristics, there's this notion actually is a discussion in every neighborhood. It's not just in the West Side. Whether it's about, do we want more 100-story buildings in my neighborhood in certain areas, that's a discussion. So for us, neighborhood characteristics is really looking at what's there now, what we could do in the future. That's not going to change things radically. And I've stood up for the reason why we even have this so-called separation of the RH1 with the ADU legislation was because we were trying to preserve those characteristics. And here we are, after for the residents to be working on this for 2 years, and they're very anxious to get this done. And for us to now have an opportunity to just make the correction, and that's what this is about, as they have testified. We're not talking about changing the houses. The houses are there. All we're saying is, well, let's make sure that it's zoned properly, and that's what I asked for. In regards to Supervisor Wiener's amendment, as I mentioned, I'm open to it. I just want to do my due diligence beyond the few people that came today. I know they're leaders, but I also like to be able to check on things. So potentially, one way to keep on moving this forward is I ask that you split the file and have one that move forward without the amendments, and one that you could either move forward or not move forward, and keep it here for at least another week or 2 weeks for me to get some more information to accept the amendments as presented by Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin, your name was on the...
Thank you. I was actually going to suggest something similar to what Supervisor Yee suggested, but by way of what we heard, I heard the head of the Midtown Terrace Association saying that he liked Supervisor Wiener's amendment. I heard Mr. Wooding say he did not. I heard some other people saying they were open to it. I heard that there are a number of existing ADUs and that people were pleased to have them and have more of them. I am delighted that Supervisor Wiener has come around to my original way of thinking. I am highly inclined to support Supervisor Wiener's amendment, but I absolutely respect the desire of the district supervisor to have more time to dialogue with his constituents. And to that end, I was actually going to say, why don't we send forward the, whatever we want to call it, rezoning or fixing of the code, and keep the Wiener amendment here. I'm inclined to vote for it after Supervisor Yee does his due diligence with his constituents, and maybe in a week or two we can forward that as a trailing piece of legislation.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the members of the public on both sides of this issue, and I think it was a very rational and measured discussion, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate the candor from the Midtown Terrace neighbors, which is consistent with the emails I had received, that what's at issue here is, I believe, the 3-foot side setback, and really not the ADUs. The ADUs are not an issue here. When we talk about, I appreciate some of my friends from the YIMBY party, who and we've stood together on many battles over many thousands and thousands of units of housing, and I'm sure we'll do so in the future. I think when you look at what's going to actually create more housing in Midtown Terrace, it's accessory dwelling units. It's not adding 3 feet to the side of the building. I completely understand the argument that if you have more square footage, you can have more people living there. But in terms of what's actually going to create more housing in this neighborhood, it is making it, having it remain legal for people to add accessory dwelling units on the, I don't remember how many lots are in in Midtown Terrace, but it's quite a few. And so there is a real potential there, and that's why I offered the amendment that I offered today. I think it's an elegant solution to what would have truly been a downzoning to say accessory dwelling units are no longer allowed under city law. And while, again, I appreciate the existence of state law, the reality is that that state law has been in effect for at least 30 years, maybe 35 years, and not a single ADU has ever in 30 plus years been permitted in San Francisco under the state law. That may change in the future, and Godspeed, but for now we know we have a local law that we just passed on a 10-to-1 vote that allows for ADUs in RH1 districts. I just don't want to take a neighborhood that allows ADUs and say ADUs under city law are no longer allowed. So I'd like to move this amendment, the oral amendment that I read today, and I'll reread it in a moment. That there will be 8 days between today's meeting and the full board meeting. If for whatever reason Supervisor Yee decides that he does not want that amendment, he can make a motion at the full Board of Supervisors to strip it out, and I believe that would be an appropriate motion to make if he wants to make it. Colleagues, my request would be, I make a motion to adopt the oral amendment I read at the beginning, which I will reread, and that is, quote, for all lots proposed to be rezoned from RH1 to RH1D under today's ordinance, the prohibition of adding an accessory dwelling unit pursuant to Planning Code Section 207 does not apply, and so that is my motion.
So relative to my earlier comment and suggestion, how about we marry these couple of different ideas together, duplicate the file, amend one file, leave the other file unamended, send them both forward, give Supervisor Yee the ability to outreach and discuss and dialogue with his constituents for the next 8 days, and of course all of them, as they have, can contact us. We've gotten lots of emails on this, and we will vote one file up or the other.
All right.
Is that acceptable, Supervisor Yee?
That would be acceptable, and actually in 8 days, because there's something happening, I will have opportunities to speak to quite a few residents.
That's good to hear. All right. Okay, so.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Supervisor Wiener.
If I may, first of all, a question to the City Attorney. If we were to forward this with the amendment, and if the full board were to decide to strip the amendment out, the full board could then simply adopt the legislation?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. That's right. Either way, an amendment to add your proposal or to take it out would not require a referral back to this committee or to planning.
Yeah, so I don't see the need to duplicate the file. Again, if a majority of the board were to decide that they didn't want this amendment, they could simply strip it out and pass the legislation in its original form. So I don't see the need to do a duplicated file. But ultimately, perhaps the chair might weigh in with her.
Sure,
opinion.
thank you. I too don't see the need necessarily to duplicate the file. While I don't support the carve out, I am willing to show some deference to the District 7 supervisor as well as to the residents that have come out and written emails. Historically, I've never supported a carve out in RHD1 from the ADU program, but I'm going to show some deference to you, Supervisor Yee. So with that said, I mean, you kind of know where the indications are. Do we still need to duplicate the file, or can we just put it to a vote? Let's see, Supervisor Peskin.
So we do not need to duplicate the file. I think Supervisor Wiener is right. What I would suggest is that if we take the amendment, we send the matter to the full board without recommendation so the board can realize that this is something that has been discussed down under.
All right, that sounds good. I can take a motion for that.
Okay, so the motion is to adopt the amendment and then to forward the item as amended with no recommendation.
Without objection.
And thank you for.
Excuse me.
I mean, I have no objection.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thought you were stepping on my toes
No,
over
no, no.
there.
I just
okay,
meant I do not
Supervisor
object.
Peskin. All right.
Can I say that?
Yes, Supervisor Yee, before we take the vote, go ahead.
I have no objections to that.
All right, thank you very much. All right. And this motion, as amended, passes unanimously without objection. This is coming out of the committee, going to the full board as amended, but without recommendation.
Yes.
All right. All right, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, did you get that? Did everyone follow that? Good. Mr. Clerk, could you call item 2?
Item number 2, urgency ordinance approving an interim zoning memorandum to, interim zoning moratorium to prohibit first-story business or professional services uses in the West Portal Avenue Neighborhood Commercial District for 45 days.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting topic. Supervisor Yee is also the sponsor of this item. I believe Supervisor Yee is going to be requesting a continuance on this item. Is that correct, sir? We're on item number 2.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks for hearing this today. I'll make this real quick. We're undergoing, what's happening in our business corridors, in particular Ocean Avenue and West Portal. We're having a larger discussion about the neighborhood commercial zones and what we want to see out of it. The existing zoning code is outdated and it needs to be relooked at. So the issue before us today proves that there can be confusion when items are not well defined in the code, particularly around professional services and stock brokerages. I introduced this interim moratorium because there is currently a lack of clarity in the planning code, which has led to conflicting opinions on the interpretation of the law. There are a lot of strong feelings about how to best proceed. Therefore, to provide more time for dialogue and discussion of the different stakeholders involved, I request the committee to continue this item to the call of the chair, and we hope to bring a resolution that will work for existing and future business of the corridor.
All right, thank you very much. I'm happy to see if we can honor that request. We've got some public comment cards here. Sure, before we begin and take public comment, we'll take Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Cohen. I just want to comment. This is an issue that I know Supervisor Yee has been dealing with, and I've grappled a lot with in my district. And we've gone through it in Noe Valley and also in Castro Upper Market about what happens when you have enough non-retail, non-food or drink office type ground floor space in a commercial district, and eventually at some point you reach a tipping point where it really undermines the vibrancy of that corridor. And so I have authored now, I don't even know, multiple pieces of legislation, both in Noe Valley and Castro Upper Market, to require conditional use for ground floor office type of uses. I authored that legislation to require conditional use, and also am now, or recently, authored legislation in Noe Valley, and now we adopted interim controls in Castro NCD to require conditional use for ground floor medical uses, because again, at some point you can reach a tipping point there. So I'm very sensitive to this issue and support of the change. I would encourage, my just personal view is I think conditional use is a very flexible and powerful tool, and I hope that will be part of the discussion, and I hope at some point we'll have citywide controls to deal with this issue, because I know it's cropping up in a lot of neighborhoods.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Yee.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Supervisor Wiener, thanks for making those comments. That's what I'm grappling with at this point. And that's why I'm asking for a continuance, so that we don't jeopardize anything just because of the moratorium.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor.
Mr. Peskin, do you have something to say? I see your name on the queue. No? All right. Well, let's go ahead and go to public comment. I've got a stack of cards here, quite a few. Stefano Castellato, Rick, Regina Wong, Tom Canely, Beverly Freiberg. We'll stop there. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Stefano Castellato, and I am a registered lobbyist in the city and a consultant to Peter and Ellen, who you'll hear from today. First and foremost, I would like to agree with the supervisor for a continuance today. I think there's some clarity that needs to be given, and I think the best way about that is just to step back for a minute. I think one thing, too, is if business professional services in the West Portal area, there may be quite a few that are not code compliant currently. So I might recommend a study be done. So the goal here is to make sure that we have all the merchants meeting city requirements, and they all serve the public well. So we want to make sure that they're code compliant. Would like to add an exemption, if I could, if we could hear that for 360 West Portal A. I do not believe that this business professional model poses any threat to the vibrancy of the community. It's 3.5 blocks down from the tunnel. It's situated over 5 feet above the ground, less than 6, but does not meet the 6-foot requirement threshold. Therefore, they were on the path for a conditional use permit, and this moratorium, as it read earlier, may have posed an obstruction to the pathway. So we want to make sure that they get an exemption if possible. In addition, we'd like to get to do more community outreach, both to the merchant and the residential group. We have not been able to present yet as of today. We don't even have a planner assigned to the case yet. Mediation's the way to go. Let's get everybody in the room, and let's work towards the best possible outcome. My outcome would be allow the merchant to go through the CUP and the moratorium to pass in some shape or form.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Rick Fain, and I'm part of the West Portal group that is being directly impacted by the moratorium proposed. As Stefano mentioned, we were directed by the planning department upon a favorable determination to follow the process of filing the CUP, which we have done, and we are trying to take the steps as given to us to proceed to the path of being approved in our space. We were caught by surprise that we were not on a second floor location. As you go up 8 stairs and to reach our office, we are just under the 6-foot cutoff where this problem wouldn't have even started. So it is our intention to comply with all regulations, but that we're being derailed our day in the CUP hearing by this moratorium. When we are being, I will call the name witch hunt by the neighborhood association, who disagrees with the findings of the planning department, yet they've never talked to any one of us to see what it is that we actually do. Thank you.
Next speaker. Supervisors, my name is Tom Canali. I'm the current president of the Greater West Portal Neighborhood Association, known as GWAPNA. We were formed in 1975. We've got about 342 members, and we're regularly engaged in looking at issues that impact our community. We know that with zoning, it's always tough because you're trying to make sure that you're protecting the community, the neighborhood, the local character. We also want to see growth and responsible ways to do that. I support Supervisor Z's request for a continuance. I believe that you'll find that most of the community does support that request for a continuance so that all stakeholders can be heard with fairness. I will say this, the Neighborhood Association, GWAPNA, has never had this issue presented to us. So there's no witch hunt, believe me. It's simply an issue that we've never been asked to address. But my understanding is that we will be looking at it at our next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly Freiberg, not Emily. I'm a longtime resident of San Francisco. My husband and I moved here in 1997. And addressing the matter at hand, eliminating a business like Peter Chen's from the West Portal Business Corridor doesn't jive with what I think is the intended character of that corridor. I'm a client of Peter's. He's been my financial advisor for 15 years. In that time, he and Ellen have become friends. We share family stories. Their daughter has grown into a young lady, and my sons, now fathers and husbands, use Peter as their financial advisor. Peter and Ellen didn't just move into a space on West Portal, hang a shingle, and say, we're open for business. Theirs has been a mom and pop operation since the beginning. They carefully chose a space, decorated and upgraded it, assured the advocacy of their clients by keeping them informed of the status and involving them in that. They were proud of their new office, and when it was completed, they had a celebration party. I know Peter and Ellen also appreciate the 3-block walk to their office. Peter's office suits West Portal. My sons are attracted to it. For the health of the neighborhood, young families like theirs should be encouraged. My personal story is meant to illustrate that this small, hands-on, family-run business provides the involved, caring, down-home quality service that West Portal seeks to foster. Some of the businesses on West Portal are becoming old and tired. Their service is not friendly, and their storefronts are faded and dusty. I don't frequent them any longer. Peter's office provides the vigor, values, and local friendship.
Thank you. I have a couple more speakers I'd like to call up. Lise Mussel, John Stedman, Judy Schindler, Brian Schindler, Ellen Chang, Ashley Chen, and Peter Chen. Please come up.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Lise Mosel. My family has been a longtime client of Mr. Chen's. Peter became my financial advisor 3 years and 3 months ago when I moved here. He's also the financial advisor to my children, so I completely relate to and agree with what Beverly just said about this being a family-run business. What I'd like you all to know about Peter and Ellen Chen is that when they chose this business, they were looking specifically for an office in West Portal. It's near their home, it's where their friends are, it's where their hearts are, and it's where their community allegiance lies. They weren't looking around San Francisco for a convenient storefront. They specifically sought out West Portal. I know they researched everything, every rule, every law to find a building that they could call home and that would also be accessible to their clients, many of whom are elderly and many of whom live near the area. They spent months finding the building. They spent thousands of dollars of their own money renovating it, and their commitment to the West Portal community is significant. When I came here 3 years and 3 months ago, Peter basically gave me a tour of West Portal and said, this is where we're going to end up. This is our home. Because of that, I now personally frequent over 15 businesses in the West Portal area. I have brought out-of-town friends here. I've also brought my San Francisco friends here. And I believe that the vibrancy of West Portal, to use your term, has been significantly increased since the advent of Peter and Ellen Chen. I think that any kind of a moratorium right now would really unjustly punish a family and a business that has made their livelihood and their life in West Portal. And I encourage you to do whatever you can to keep this wonderful family thriving business going. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is John Stedman, and I've been a resident of Forest Hills for the past 23 years. I've been consulting with Peter Chen for over 20 years. I highly respect him, and as do many people in the West Portal community. He is an outstanding citizen and patronizes many of the local businesses and restaurants. I do not understand why this legislation is currently being proposed, and I'm against it. Peter's operation is their livelihood, and it needs to continue without interruption. I consult with Peter every month or two and frequent the West Portal businesses and restaurants several times a week. Peter attracts many well-to-do clients from St. Francis Wood, Forest Hills, West Portal, and these people spend money in West Portal. I prefer, as do other of his clients, to visit Peter at his local office. It's very convenient. I do not understand why the West Portal Merchants Association filed a complaint. They seem to be out of touch, as most of the other residents and merchants of West Portal seem to be in favor of Peter and his business. I do not understand why the moratorium needs to take effect immediately, and I encourage you to find a speedy resolution. To force Peter to move at this time would be costly. It would interrupt his business and possibly lose clients. It would also cause another possible vacancy in West Portal and cause additional cost to the landlord. I don't understand why this should have to happen. In summary, I'm against the legislation and think not only that it's unfair, but that the residents and merchants of Greater West Portal, not what they really want. I urge you to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, we're going to do this together. It's
Okay.
a tag team. I am Brian Schindler, and this is my wife, Judy Schindler. I'm a native San Franciscan. We have lived in the West Portal neighborhood for over 33 years. We are very familiar with that district. And we're here to also oppose the interim moratorium on first-story businesses. I remember when Peter first told me that he was moving down to that distant block of West Portal and said specifically that, oh, by the way, it's on the second floor. You have to take those steps to get up to it. I want to point out that there is an elevator to take handicapped people from the street to his business. And I don't understand how that can be considered a first floor or a ground floor business. I do understand the concerns about having a thriving, vibrant West Portal corridor. Our son and his wife lived in Barcelona for a number of years, and I can tell you how I found how wonderful that is to be able to walk to your grocery store, to be able to walk to pick up the vegetables, to go to the butcher, and to see your friends along the way and say hello to their children. Little neighborhoods, shopping districts are terrific, and I want to see West Portal continue to do that. But I think this legislation specifically is misguided, and I would recommend that we oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Ching, and my husband Peter Chen and I started our practice that so many clients support about 2.5 years ago. And it was home-based initially, and about 1.5 years ago, we moved into the current location at 360A West Portal. So these are the facts. We've been working diligently with the planning department during the past 16 months. We have spent countless hours of our own time that we should have used to grow our startup or cook a homemade meal for our daughter or participate in her school activities. But instead, in order to bring our business into compliance, we spent countless hours working to bring our business to compliance. And not to mention mounting legal fees that incur during the process. Now, the zoning administrator spent significant amounts of time to study our business in order to make an accurate determination. He did his due diligence and made the determination that we are a professional service use. He stated in his findings clearly and repeatedly in his notice of violation in front of the appeals board hearing. And when we requested the formal LOD, letter of determination, his determination has been consistent that we are a business professional use. Now, we were instructed by the zoning administrator and the appeals board to apply for a conditional use permit, which we filed in early June. Now, it's been over 3 months. And the next thing we know is there is a new moratorium being proposed that will completely block the progress of our conditional use permit. I don't understand why the new improved planning code should apply to an application that's already in process. That's grossly unfair and an obstruction to justice, not to mention an obstruction to our business and our family lives.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Ashley Chen, and I am a resident of District 7. My parents have set up their own small business on West Portal and have been there for over 16 months now. We have been living in District 7 for over 8 years, and I have been going to various classes along West Portal. Every Saturday, I go to art class right under my parents' business, and every Saturday, I also go to the tutoring just 1 block away. Additionally, three times a week, I also go to the martial arts classes just 1 block away from my parents' business. We also eat on West Portal all the time. West Portal has been our home for so many years, and having an office so close to all the things we love is amazing. But I fear that we will be forced to leave the community that we love, and my parents' clients love. Because my parents have been so busy these past few weeks, we eat at the Japanese restaurant right next to our office more times than we have eaten at home. I sincerely wish that this will not continue to be dragged on, and my parents will be able to stay in West Portal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Vic, I won't even try to pronounce the last name. Tammy Scott Wings, Betty Jean Wins, Fionn Shi, Edward Remedios, Sam Kwong, and Bridget. My apologies on the name. Vic Chaudhry. You had to leave? Okay. Next speaker, Tammy Scott. Are you here? Hi, Tammy.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Tammy Scott Wiggins. I am the vice president of the West Portal Merchants Association. I have been the lead on this complaint that we had filed back in June of 2015. I'm merely here today to say that we are in support of the continuance of this zoning issue, that it be continued. There's much that needs to be discussed. There's a lot of misinformation. This falls squarely on the planning department and their failure to do their job, essentially. But Peter and Ellen, I'm sorry, we apologize that we're kind of taking up your time today with our zoning issues and problems. Peter and Ellen, knew as of last Thursday that this was going to be put as a continuance directly from Jen Lowe from Supervisor Yee's office, so they're aware of that. We are setting up a meeting between all the stakeholders, the city, Supervisor Yee's office, the planning department, so we can all sit down face to face and try to come out with some outcome that will be suitable to all the parties involved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker. I'm sorry, Supervisor Yee.
Just like to say, nobody needs to apologize in regards to public making public comments. This is your right.
All right. Next speaker, I have. Hi, Sam. Okay,
sorry.
Go ahead. That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
Sam Kwong. Afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors. I want to first state that there's no need for really an emergency moratorium on this West Portal Avenue for professional business offices. I was involved with this project early as Ellen and Peter asked me to first look at the condition of the building, whether it is considered a first floor or a second floor. And through my investigation and the historical background of the permits of the building, actually, when it's first built, it's everything on the building where they are is really a second floor only, until later when planning department have a new definition what first floor is, that all of a sudden their floor became a first floor. Nevertheless, the situation thus created this need by the zoning administrators to ask them to file for a conditional use permit, which they've diligently done, and they are in process to get this thing reviewed. However, this moratorium will impact them, and as you heard from many speakers, affect their business. This West Portal Avenue is a very vibrant neighborhood that needs to have continued businesses. We should not have legislation that restrict business development, and I'm here to oppose this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a few more cards. I'm going to call up Betty Jean Weiss, Fionn Shi, Edward Remedios, and Bridget Sharnan. And if I've missed anyone, please feel free to step up.
My name is Betty Jean Weiss, and last week, I reached my 100th birthday.
Congratulations. That's excellent.
I've lived and been a homeowner in District 7 for over 45 years. Thank you. And lived in San Francisco since the beginnings of World War II. Today I'm speaking for Peter Chen and his business on West Portal Avenue. My late husband and I started working with Peter over 35 years ago on West Portal Avenue, where I have continued to care for all of my business affairs. Recently, there was an interim legislation that has been proposed that would exclude Peter Chen's business from West Portal. I'm very, very concerned about this action. And I trust that the moratorium will be removed from the docket. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you for your time, supervisors. My name is Fionn Shi. I'm new to San Francisco. A year ago, my husband and I quit our job in the South Bay and Peninsula and moved to San Francisco so that my son can go to a school with learning disabilities in San Francisco, and we love the city. And I was able to still work part-time at Peter and Ellen's office. They embraced me like a family, so I can work in West Portal, which is close to my new house in the Noe Valley. I spend a lot of time in Noe Valley and West Portal and bring my clients and friends over to the area. And so basically this whole legislation and the moratorium, we just feel like we're a victim of the whole thing. And so, you know, we really like to request for exemption of this moratorium. I don't think it's a bad thing, but we do have to consider some special circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Edward Remedios. My wife and I are long-term residents of San Francisco.
Could you pull the mic to your mouth so we can just hear you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're long-term residents of San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco on April 29, 1969, and soon decided to make it my permanent home. I have lived here for over 47 years. My wife and I regularly vote in elections here. We are both strongly opposed to the proposed urgency ordinance. On September 2nd, my wife and I sent an email to Supervisor Yee in which we gave reasons for our opposition. We asked why he was proposing the legislation and who would benefit from it. To date, neither he nor his staff has responded. The email I sent is in the packet of communications that the committee received for this meeting. On September 10th, my wife and I attended the Supervisors Candidate Forum organized by the West of Twin Peaks Central Council. I submitted a question asking candidates to address the proposed urgency ordinance. In my opinion, Supervisor Yee's response was totally inadequate. All other candidates opposed the proposed legislation. I think the committee should consider reasons for the proposed urgency ordinance, whether the planning department should make a determination on the conditional use permit prior to any proposed legislation, the benefits, if any, of the proposed legislation, and if there are benefits, do they outweigh the disadvantages? I thank you for the opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Bridget Chernin from Balboa Terrace Homeowners Association. I first heard of this moratorium last Thursday, and Ellen reached out, and when we heard this, my board was quite concerned. First of all, Ellen lives in Balboa Terrace. We support our membership and their business, especially locally in West Portal, which has been having a lot of vacant storefronts, and we don't understand why this moratorium is coming towards a financial institution based on 4 inches of questionable second-story level. There are so many different, if you're talking about so many financial services in West Portal, our president, Sophie Brielle, wanted to suggest, why aren't we looking at nail spas, where there's over dozens of nail spas in West Portal. If you want to have retail space, then you should look at West Portal as a whole rather than scaring off a business that's been there for over a year plus. So I hope that you support Ellen and her family, and this has been an arduous process, indicating that she's been working with planning since 2015. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Diana Schindler. I've been a resident of San Francisco since 68. And I have been in this district in the same home since 1974. And we are longtime clients of Mr. Peter Chen. And my husband and I are extremely disturbed by the capricious nature of both the planning process and this recent legislation, which would affect, as far as we know, only one single office. For years, ever since we moved into the West Portal district, I have generally looked down on that as an area to shop in or to have much of anything to do with, because unlike many other districts, shopping districts in the city, it has languished all that time. And now Mr. Yi has proposed a moratorium legislation which would hurt a man and his office, which has done everything to jump over over the hoops put in front of them by the zoning process. And we hate to see such capriciousness happening in our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers that'd like to talk on item 2? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. So there's a motion that's been made to continue this item to the call of the... Yes, Supervisor Yi?
No, I just want to say, again, I want to thank the public for coming out. As I stated up front, it's my intent to ask for a continuance of this legislation, and I hope that you'll be honoring my request.
Yes, thank you very much. So the request that Supervisor Yi has made is that we continue this item to the call of the chair so he can continue to work with neighbors. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Yi, and good luck to you and your neighbors. Mr. Clerk, can you call item 3?
Item number 3, ordinance amending the planning code to require inclusion in the housing balance report data about the withdrawal of housing units from the rental market by all means, including owner move-ins.
Okay, so we've got April Veneracion Ang from Supervisor Kim's office here to present on this item.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is April Veneracion Ang. I am here to introduce the legislation, which is really a technical cleanup to the housing balance report legislation that we introduced and passed in 2015. The planning department requested that we clarify the intent of our legislation in collecting data, particularly regarding units that have been removed from protected status. The report has since been published 3 times and have included the 4 categories, which is owner move-in evictions, condo conversions, demolitions, and Ellis Act evictions. And these are all stated in the administrative code. And this is just technical and cleanup legislation to specify that we indeed desire to have owner move-in evictions as part of the data collection for the legislation. This was heard at the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission did request some slight modifications to our legislation, which we have prepared, or the City Attorney's Office has prepared. Thank you, John. And just to walk through the legislation and the requested changes, page 2, line 17 to 18, just specifying in the housing balance calculation that less the number of units removed from rent control or below market status, adding that language. And the other requested amendment from the Planning Department and the Commission also approved was related to the timing of the dates for the hearing and the required reports. The Planning Department had requested that we attempt to sync up the current reports that the Planning Department is required to do and move the biannual housing balance report from September to October 1st and from March 1st to April 1st, and that the required annual hearing be changed to April 15th rather than April 1st. So that's simply the introduction of the legislation. Diego Sanchez is here from the Planning Department to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Peskin, do you have any questions?
I do not. I've read the information. Seems straightforward, sensible, and reasonable, and I commend the department and the sponsor for continuing to refine our housing balance reporting requirements.
Okay. And we do have amendments that Supervisor Kim or her office has distributed. We'll take those up after public comment. At this point, we will open it up for public comment. I don't have any cards, but if you have any public comment, please come forward. Public comment is 2 minutes.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is Fernando Marti with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. Simply to state our support for the amendments and our support for this particular piece of legislation that has contributed so much important information about how we are achieving our housing balance in the city, how we are creating new affordable housing, as well as counting the housing that we lose and at times gain through rent control, through ADUs and other things that many of you are working on. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, is there any additional public comment on item 3? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Peskin, could I have a motion to adopt the amendments as proposed by Supervisor Kim?
So moved.
Without objection, the amendments are adopted. And then could I have a motion to forward item 3 to the full Board of Supervisors with positive recommendation?
So moved.
Without objection, that will be the order. Item number 4.
Item number 4, hearing on the Planning Department's 6-month report for the interim sign controls in the Transit Center District Pan area between Folsom, Harrison, Essex, and 2nd Street.
Okay, this is authored by Supervisor Kim, and April Veneracion from her office is here.
This item before you is a hearing to seek the board's support for the 6-month report on the Trans-Bay interim sign controls. These controls were enacted in November 10th, 2015, and this is our 6-month report. The intent of Supervisor Kim is to request to the City Attorney's Office and with Planning Department support to make these controls permanent. Anne Marie Rogers is here for any specific questions on the prepared report from the Planning Department. And thank you, Planning Department, for your 6-month report.
Okay, seeing that Supervisor Peskin appears to have no comments or questions.
It's a short, straightforward report.
Yes, we will move to public comment. Is there any public comment on item 4? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And this is a hearing, so I guess could I have a motion? Ms. Veneracion, did you want this filed?
It says here required board action. The report is required to be considered at a public hearing, and the board has the option of accepting or rejecting this report. There isn't really a motion in front of us in the packet, but as far as I'm concerned, we should accept the report, or at least those words should be uttered. And I don't think there's any action for the full board to take. But I, for one, accept it, and I think we will see forthcoming permanent legislation, which is really the subject of this exercise.
Thank you. Mr. Givner, could I get clarification on what action we should or should not be taking today?
You could initiate a motion in committee, and I believe this is what we did last time, although I can't, maybe April, if you remember, initiate a motion in committee to accept and forward it to the full board for adoption. Is that how we did it last time?
I'm sorry. This is the interim sign control. So I have not had an experience of accepting a 6-month report. But
why don't we just make a motion to file this item and proceed with permanent legislation?
Sounds good.
And the author, is that acceptable?
I believe so. Is there a formality, planning department, that we should accept a report? Okay, then that's fine.
Okay,
file.
so Supervisor Peskin has made a motion to file item 4, and we'll take that motion. With open up. I did public comment already.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So on the motion to file item 4, we'll take that without objection. Mr. Clerk, is there any additional business before the committee?
That completes the agenda.
We are adjourned.